Another thing Monroe told me when I showed him my Lloyd Laura, I've always tried to, play it with the action. Those of you who are musicians know what action is. You try to put it to where you can play it without buzzing, but get it as high as you can and still, make a good sound to it. But I like to have it low enough where I can hit some fancy licks every once in a while. But Monroe, he looked at my mandolin and he looked at it kind of, you need to get the strings up there where it's easy to play. Because he kept the strings about that far off the fingerboard. Well, the next pivotal thing that happened to bluegrass music was in 1945 when a young man from Shelby, North Carolina joined the Bluegrass Boys. Mr. Earl Scruggs brought the banjo, brought the 5-string banjo, the rhythm, to the bluegrass. And here's a man here that can tell you about that. I'm going to let Charlie talk a little bit and pick a tune for us. How about that, Charlie?
Okay, sure, Tony. I'll stand up too, because I've been sitting for a little while. Yeah, these times that Tony's talking about, banjos were not a refined thing in those days. Tenor banjo was the king across the nation. That's what people were interested in. 5-string banjos that came from Gibson and a lot of the other makers too were usually shipped to the Appalachians, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginias, and that's pretty much where they all went. Anyway, a young man from North Carolina, Earl Scruggs, had a hero over in Spartanburg, South Carolina, whose name was Snuffy Jenkins. And I don't know as much about Snuffy as I do about Earl, so I can't tell you how Snuffy Jenkins deducted all these other banjo makes and landed on the Gibson Mastertone banjo. But through pure logic, it was all about the sound, because the Mastertone banjo produced more sound, projected more sound, and was a very high quality banjo. Not to say that Vegas and Bacon and Days were not, but Gibson, there was something about a Gibson that these guys heard in this tone chamber that they really liked, whereas opposed to a Vega, a Bacon and Day, those tone chambers were made out of very thin wood and very thin material, and this Mastertone design, even in the 1920s, was revolutionary. Although Gibson had, as we speculate, borrowed designs from other banjo makers such as Paramount, Bacon and Day. But anyway, getting back to the Carolinas, the young boy Earl Scruggs and Don Reno, who were very close to the same age. They were 2 years apart in age. Scruggs coming from Shelby County, North Carolina, and Don Reno coming from Buffalo, South Carolina. These two kids frequented gigs where the other was playing, and would often sit in the front row, and Earl would watch Don. Sometime later, Don would watch Earl, and they were both proteges of Snuffy Jenkins. Okay, so Snuffy Jenkins at that time had many Gibson banjos. The one that he gravitated to and used the rest of his career was a Gibson RB4. And our friend Jim Mills, right here in Raleigh, is in possession of that banjo and is a very good custodian of the instrument and lots of other important Gibson banjos too. But anyway, jumping back over to the Bluegrass Boys, String Bean, who played the banjo with Monroe before Scruggs came along, String Bean was playing a style 11 Gibson banjo, which has no tone ring, no projection, and he was playing a 2-finger style. So when Scruggs started with Monroe, Scruggs was playing the same banjo, not the identical banjo, but one just like it. And in his early recordings, you hear Earl playing an RB11. Maybe the first 2 years he was with Bill, and relating back to Snuffy, he wanted himself a Mastertone, so he found a Mastertone up in up in Virginia, bought it from a guy named Hayes Hall, and that became the first master tone banjo in bluegrass music. 3 years later, he and Don Reno, who had been childhood friends, and in my opinion, these two are the masters of the five-string banjo, the first masters. These two young men heard something in each other's instruments that they liked, and eventually got together in Bristol and traded. Don Reno got the RB3 that he continued and played the rest of his career on, and Earl Scruggs got the Granada master tone banjo, in which was not in as good a shape as Don's banjo. So in my mind, that's the first conversion banjo.
Yeah.
Because Earl had someone make another neck for it. He replaced the parts. So in my opinion, I think Earl Scruggs had the first conversion banjo.
So was that Faulkner that made the first neck on that, or?
No, that was a guy in Nashville named J.W. Gower.
Gower,
Have
right.
you ever heard of the Grammer Guitar Company? Billy Grammer bought the patents and the rights from J. Gower.
Yeah.
And it was J. Gower's design. They just put Billy Grammer's name on it.
Right.
But anyway, he was the guy that built the first neck for Scruggs after the original Granada neck. But the moral of the story, since this is a Gibson thing, the moral of the story is that the master tone banjo became the first dependable, high quality banjo used in this music, and has remained that way ever since. It's been often been copied. There are many thousands of master tone copy banjos. This one here is a real one. This was made in 1929. It was originally a plectrum banjo, which means a 4-string banjo with a 5-string scale. Not a tenor, but a plectrum. And this particular banjo, sometimes you got a couple of hours, I'll tell you about this particular one. It has an incredible story that goes with it, rags to riches type story. And this is a model PB3, style 3, mahogany. Just like Earl's banjo, it's been redone. It's been converted. It's got a 5-string neck on it now. All the metal parts, when I got it, were busted, broken, unusable. So it's got all pre-war period parts on it. So it looks a whole lot like it did when it was new. Tony?
Oh, that's very, very informative.
That's about all I know.
And I want to hear the whole story sometime.
You got to hear it.
But-
We'll pour a cup of coffee and
All
I'll tell
right,
you.
that sounds good.